our This is the first of our 4 webinars presented by the Irish Uplands Forum, running through October, with a 5th one also penciled in for November. And tonight we're delighted to welcome Michael Gibbons, one of Ireland's leading field archaeologists, who's based in Clifton. And Michael is a graduate of UCG with a degree in history and archaeology, and he's a member of the Institute of Archaeologists in Ireland with 30 years of experience as an archaeologist. Michael has directed surveys and excavations on Croagh and has mapped the uplands and islands of the Connacht coast. And his current research interests include the archaeology of Irish uplands and islands, particularly the maritime pilgrimage tradition. And he's carried out detailed research on some of the most important of these, including Skellig Vihil, World Heritage Site, St. Macdara's Island and Cahir Island. And recent archaeological work has included mapping the intertidal zone of the Galway and North Burren coast, with a particular focus on the prehistoric midden complexes, vernacular quays, harbours and seaweed farms. Tonight is going to present a talk entitled A Fresh Look at the Archaeology and Historical Landscapes of Croagh, Achill Island and the Uplands of the Wild Nephin National Park. And Michael has also assured me that there will be time for a Q&A in just 50 minutes time. So hold your fire until then. Michael, over to you. Thanks very much.
I hope you can hear me. Okay, great. So G Madsen, yeah, Holland shot, Holland, Jeeplan Clahan, Phil Michael Gibbons here. The talk, obviously, this is a huge title, so I'll be touching in and out of aspects of the archaeology. All of these individual landscapes would warrant 2 or 3 lectures in themselves. So I'll be presenting just some new material, just a couple of observations I've had, and some very new sites we've discovered there recently. So it'll be as comprehensive, but not in depth. So, but there's some really nice material. This photograph, for example, here I took a good few years ago now. We were sailing up to map the islands of the Inishkeys, and dawn had broke, the clouds were breaking up, and we had this morning sunlight just streaming through over Achill Head here. So this is, if you're not familiar with this part of the coastline of Mayo, it's just one of the great mountain landscapes and seascapes of Ireland. So we're heading north here, heading up to Davalon Island, which is the southernmost island of the Inishkeys. So I'm going to be rattling through some of these sites. And just to give you a background, I've done quite a bit of work on, these are some of our pilgrimage mountains, starting in the northeast in County Down, an absolutely exceptionally beautiful county. Slieve Donard, crowned by 2 tombs, one said to have had his cell, the other his church. So that's overlooking Newcastle in County Down. Then flying westward now across to Armagh and Fermanagh, Cavan into southwest Donegal. We're back into not forgetting Tyrone, of course, into the southwest. So you have Slieve League, where I've done quite a bit of work around there. And my first job was in southwest Donegal. And then down Croagh a place very familiar to us. I was on the last night pilgrimage on Croagh in the early 1970s. I think it was 1974. And then more recently, I've been working in the southwest, doing research on the pilgrimage tradition on Mount Brandon. More recently, some new discoveries there, and of course on Skelligs. And Drung Hill is one of the others, Croagh, and then you have Church Mountain, of course, up here number 8, which is a fabulous site. So we have this tradition of holy mountains, but it's a tradition, of course, that goes back way beyond and way before Christianity. We have many mountaintop shrines and tombs and hilltop enclosures. This is a lovely one just across the border in Connemara, so I'll be going a little bit wider than Mayo, but this is Cairn Seafen. It's in the mountains west of Oughterard. On the way out, Mam Cross is on the far left, and you're looking up into the Mam Valley here. And in the middle distance, you have the forest cover, but peeping above this and dominating this entire landscape is a very large cairn, peat bound at the edge, but it's very similar in size to some of the big hilltop cairns. So it's much larger than your normal cairn. but it's clearly designed to be seen and viewed to dominate the landscape. So in the Neolithic, we have evidence all over the country of the manipulation of the landscape, which actually transforms the shape and form, actually change the actual shape of the mountains when viewed from outside the area. Of course, these mountains would also have been lived in and operated for the 4,000 years before this. Hunter-gatherer evidence now is turning up in the mountains of Leitrim, Knocknashee, Hillfort, near Tubbercurry recently. They found some Mesolithic artifacts going back pre-farming 7,000 years ago. So these mountains would have also been the focus of at least episodic hunter-gatherer interest going through here.
I bake with black ones because black tins, like black baking trays, because they bake differently. Black heats up differently. You know what
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Hello, I'm sorry. Could you mute yourself, please? You're interfering with the speaker.
Okay, I continue if that's okay. Some other great sites. This is one of my favorite upland sites. Again, it's very similar to one of the sites I'll be talking about. It's a site overlooking on the Skull in the Kerry Mountains. A unique site so far. It's the great stone alignment complex, the biggest one in Ireland, on top of the mountains there, overlooking on the Skull village. Is actually, and you can see it from the bottom. It's crowning a ridge, 2,000 feet high. So these sites are clearly designed. This is stone alignments would typically be Bronze Age in date, but this way may actually be Neolithic. And the cairn here is one of two hilltop cairns running along this ridge line. Other mountains, of course, this beautiful mountain here, which I've popped up into Mayo. This is Slieve Carr. And in the middle distance, you have one of the buildings that has recently been worked on by the National Monument Service. The Bangor Trail runs quite close to this. So this is a really, really fantastic landscape here. And it's one I've been in and out of it over the years, but not nearly as much as I should be, because it's one of these really, really extraordinary places. This is the Owen Duff River system. And it's got this massive mountain. It's about a 2-hour hike to get into it, but it's a mountain that's well worth walking into. And it's one of the largest intact and relatively well preserved upland blanket bogs we have, with salmon rivers, grouse. 5 pairs of grouse took off as I walked into this mountain landscape. And it's big country, so that's what's lovely about it. It's this gorgeous upland area. And this is just west, or Ballycroagh is to the west of this photograph. So you have, it's empty at first glance as you walk through it, but as you get your eyes tuned into it, then there's more to this landscape than bogs and lochans. So this is like the flow country of northern Scotland, which has just been designated a World Heritage Site. So this is one of the most important boglands we have. Similar in some ways to the lovely site just down the road from us here, the Roundstone Bog Complex. And it's surrounded by these beautiful mountains here. So this river here, I was following this in, because tucked along and inside and underneath these boulders here, you have a series of hut sites of various ages, with the big massif of Slieve Carr itself in the background. Along the river edge, you have evidence for late medieval settlement, 19th century settlement, this lovely river edge house site here, right down on the water's edge. Not a lot in terms of early historic monuments known from this area, but it's the blanket bog, of course, has enveloped and continued to grow right through the early historic period. So there's a good chance there is quite a number of sites in there yet to be recognized in here. So this is the mist burning over the top of it. And of course, if you're there, this is a little island. So the really lovely but quite dangerous landscape, if you're not aware of it. These are quaking bogs, still impacted by sheep to a good degree, and you can see that on these tiny little islets in the middle of the bog pools. Just a huge range of bog plants here, and then stretching all the way to the horizon. So this is a landscape that needs care and traversing it and typically going around the edge rather than up through the middle of it. As you climb up onto the hill, these huge views open up of Erris and Achill. So this is Achill in the distance, Achill, Croagh in the background, Slievemore in the foreground, Inishbigel down to the left. And you're looking down then onto Minnon and then Tonragui on the far left. So you have this one, and then this the sort of dense, well, not densely, but fairly thickly populated coastal zone. And Slieve Alp is the hill in the shadow there, which has a series of cairns on top of it. So the Nephins have these, you know, really exceptional, and it's one of the probably the least visited mountain ranges in the country. And just access into it, it's a bit of a trek in. Bangor Trail goes right through this area, a trail that goes back probably to the 17th century at least, but an exceptional landscape. Here you go, we're looking down westward here. This is heading up on to Slieve Carr. Slieve Carr has got the highest cairn on top of it, but this view is looking out onto the Broadhaven Bay up into the northwest, and the quarry there, the white, is the quarry at just at Bangor Erris itself. So good. If this view isn't familiar to you, it's you're looking northwest over towards Achill and northwest Mayo here. Really lovely place. Again, a slightly different angle here. This is a tributary of the Owen Duff River with the bog pools in it, and little fertile shra is the word in Irish to describe those. These are these lovely meandering rivers here with glacial deposits in the angles, and all along these little curved oxbow curves here you've got evidence of settlement going back certainly to the 18th, probably 17th century, all along them. And again, in the far background here you've got the mountains of Achill and Croagh on the left hand side. As we get higher, what's interesting about the mountain is it's as you get up onto the top, and this is heading on the eastern or the northwestern slope, sorry. So you're heading from the sort of Bangor Erris side. You're up 2,000 feet now. Still quite a lot of bog on top here, eroding bog. Recovering quite a bit since I was here years ago. So you can see here lots of vegetation coming back. So there does seem to be a positive impact from lessening of grazing up on these uplands. I'm not sure when that started, but there was a lot more exposed peat up here when I was last up at it. And then just on the top of the ridge here, you can begin to see the outline of a cairn. It's just a tiny little pimple at this stage, but I'm still quite a long ways up. And the cairn that dominates this mountain, Dahi's cairn, is visible only from the north and the northwest. It's a massive tomb, but it's clearly designed to be seen from the coastline running from Ballycastle around to Ballycroagh and up into further north, up towards Carrowhike, the Mullet Peninsula itself, and Erris Head. So this tomb was specifically chosen to be sort of viewed from the north. When you get up there, it's quite a tomb, like it's massive. And it's very intact, of course, from our Ordnance Survey made a little bit of a historic relic at the moment. The trig points, these were just put in immediately before sort of satellite navigation. So they're a bit of a historic feature in themselves. But the cairn is interesting in that it's got this attached enclosure. So a cairn like this is much larger again than your normal cairn. This is likely to contain possibly a passage tomb. Certainly it's Neolithic or at latest around 2000 BC. So it really dominates the landscape here, and it's viewing out onto the north side. But and they've cleared, and you can see when you go around it, the ground has been cleared of glacial debris. All this loose rock has been collected, piled up, and the chamber is still, it's buried deep in this cairn. So this is one of over 100 hilltop cairns in the country, but it's probably in the top 5 in terms of scale and size. So it may well be remains of a large passage tomb. So that awaits excavation. So it's a classic site dominating this very beautiful mountain north. So closer in, you can see this boulder enclosure, quite a a large structure. The cairn is either on top of it or it's coeval with the joint. We're not quite sure because there's a bit of slippage, not much on this side, but there's some slippage at the edge of the cairn here on the sort of south face of the cairn. And there's a number of other little features probably later on. Most cairns like this actually are multiple phases. You know, there's hardly a monument in the country anywhere that hasn't been altered, shaped, reworked, retouched, remodeled at some point in their long history. But this would typically, I guess, for this tomb or this cairn, it contains tomb probably going back to around 3,500 BC, possibly a little bit later, but almost certainly with multiple uses. So these have a long history, these large cairns. So this is a Dahi's cairn, or Leach the Dahi Bawn, as it's called. It looks across, just along the ridge, and you're looking down on this beautiful Corrie Lake. So one side of the Slieve Car, you're looking out on this magnificent, pristine landscape to the west, and then you turn immediately, you look down to the east of the mountain, and it's like this industrial landscape. It sort of jars the eye. It's a large area of forestry, which has recently been taken over as part of the national park, and hopefully over the next 20 years or so, they will be gradually removing a lot of these trees as they become mature. And allowing this lowland. Now, this side of the mountain is still heavily grazed, as you can see here. Not a lot in the way of heather, a lot of erosion going on. So in time, given the time, and it takes time. Remember, the thing what we have to remember about the uplands is that these uplands had wolves in them up till 1800. And that was the single biggest event that changed the topography of these uplands. You remove your major predator, your wolf, and you can expand into cattle. Or you can expand into sheep at the expense of cattle. When you had wolves up here, we didn't have the numbers of sheep that we have in the mountains now. The sheep were a low-lying animal by and large. The mountains were dominated by cattle. And so you had bullying going on all over these mountains, which I'll show you in a minute. So, but once the switch from around 1800 on, the last of the wolves were killed off, said to be killed off in Croagh around 1800, then you have a massive expanse of grazing. And at the grazing then comes the little pocket woodlands that would have been quite common along the river edges, and more sheltered parts of the hill gradually were just vanish. And we have good evidence for that in the Connemara Mountains. And in the mountains of Muirray, because you have a lovely little valley on Muirray, it's called Derryn and Albanach on the south side. And when you go there, on the south face of Muirray, there's still scrub oak woodland visible on the cliffs above the Derryn. And the Derryn is now reduced to a handful of scrub oak. Similarly, in Glenawow, another beautiful valley in the Parthree Mountains, you have one quite substantial area of old woodland still intact on the back wall of Glenawow Mountain. Similar location to this, but of course Glenawow was 50 times the size of this little loch here. But in the background of this photograph, you have Birin Croagh. It's a mountain that peak in the distance. It's the highest peak of the eastern and Nephin Beg range. And it's got a really very interesting site on top of it. So you enter it through this valley here, and then you're climbing up to this very lovely valley. As you're coming up, the valley slides, typically in the Nephins, are covered really quite deep peat. Valley floors, fertile enough. This is the headwaters of the Deal River that runs in to Lough Conn at Crossmolina. And there's a number of low-lying cairns at the bottom. Then as you get higher up, and the mist, of course, unfortunately came down. I spotted this years and years ago, flying over with a good friend of mine, Marcus Casey. I didn't get back for 30 years almost. And this is a smaller of two cairns. Now there's lots of smaller, much smaller cairns on the ridge. But these are two of the bigger cairns, and these are prehistoric. This is cairn, but it's linked to the main cairn here in this photograph by, it's linked with this monument here. So this is a larger cairn. Again, this is crowning a very prominent spot. You can see it from Westport as you're going north into the Nephin Begs. It's the big mountain on your right-hand side that's not Nephin itself. So as you can see, it's substantially intact, still a minor little cairn trig point on top of it. This is a fabulous and very unusual in that you have two cairns side by side. This is a more straight view of it, and it's got this little wall passageway. It's like a linking cairn, linking the two cairns together. So it's quite an unusual site. And this is the view of it here. And the cairn is on the top of that peak. So this glen here is absolutely gorgeous. And on the way into it, and in all these valleys here, as you explore them further, there's a huge array of new sites are being mapped. And these are, well, there are various dates. We don't really know, we haven't a good handle on what dates they are, but certainly some of them are 18th, 17th century in date. Others are likely to be a good deal earlier. And they're typically located where you have these lovely little green patches of ground on the side of the hill, often below the scree, as in this case. And these are hut complexes or hut groups. Some of them are booley sites, booleying where the people moved cattle in the summer months up in to take advantage of these higher valleys and moving. Their dairy cows are moving, so they're milking cows and they're moving them down then after a few months. So they're going up in May, they're bringing them back down in September, this time of year, early October. And that allows the lower lying pasture to be rested while the uplands here are being managed. So this up and down movement of seasonal transhumance was a really key feature of these mountains. And that survived in parts of Connemara till the 1920s, where we have the last record of it. It seems to have died out a little bit earlier in the mountains here, but we have loads of these sites now. In the Claggan Mountain, overlooking on the way up into Croagh, there's a whole complex, really very interesting complex of these booley sites. Now, when you see them on the ground, you can see why they're easily missed. You know, some of them aren't terribly exciting looking. Little like a donut-shaped ring of stone, sometimes with an outer ring, occasionally associated with little tillage plots beside them, but not always. And occasionally also with an enclosure with them. There's actually a group of them on this side of the hill here. And that brings me a little bit further down to a place I've been climbing since I was a kid. So as a child growing up in Connemara, you were always hoping to the day that you'd be allowed to go on your night pilgrimage to Croagh. So that was always it was like a rite of passage as teenagers to climb it at night. You were joining the adult world for the first time. And you were joining the bus from Clifton, picking up people in Letterfrack, heading on and a whole pile more piling in Leenan. And the excitement was building as you made your way to Westport. Traffic was getting heavier out to Murrisk and then getting off the bus around 12 o'clock at night, maybe a bit later, getting sticks for the reek and heading up with a whole gaggle of thousands of other people on the night pilgrimage. So that was really one of the great scenes of the Irish uplands, which sadly was suspended in the mid-1970s, coinciding with the big uplift in flag shows and festivals, and of course the big push to make the Marian Shrine at Knock, the Marian Shrine. As some author said to me one day, the reason there was a night pilgrimage on Croagh, he said, if you've seen the height of it during the day, you'd never go up it. So this is in a rare view in snow covered. You're looking into the peak there, and Loch na Jowl, the Hollow of the Devil, is the name of that particular steep slope there. And to the right-hand side of it, of course, you have a little trail just tracing across the front, and that's into Baba the Reek's cave. So there's a lovely little cave, man-made cave on the slope here, just below the summit, but in quite a tricky place to navigate yourself. Not a great photograph, I'm afraid, but a very interesting one. This photograph was taken by a great friend of ours, Jerry Bracken, who was an excellent photographer, and he was showing this slide one evening at a lecture. And I said, Jerry, I like the slide, but I like the enclosure even better. So around the top of the hill here, you have a hill fort. So crowning Croagh, there is a hill fort, and there are some house sites as well. You can see down on the bottom right a number of circular enclosures. Now, we'd carried out an excavation here. Jerry Walsh was director. A small little group of us, Harry from Westport was in charge of it, and we excavated here because this mountain was threatened by gold mining in the 80s. And we found that there was a hill fort on top of it. Within the hill fort was an early church. This is one of a whole series of churches on it. Bob of the Reeks was supposed to be buried on it, and we have references to burials on the summit itself, though we didn't find any. So the summit top, this was where we're heading. This is a really famous photograph taken by Owen Campbell from West Castlebar. And this is a view of the night pilgrimage. It's probably the most stunning photograph ever taken, I'd say, of a mountain in Ireland. With the lights of Murrisk at the bottom, the huge cavalcade of people and lights and torches heading up onto the saddle here, to be joined by another wave of people coming from Connemara who came in from the south. So this is really amazing, an amazing photograph. Of course, this whole mountain now, the whole pilgrimage atmosphere has been changed with that incredible new trail that's been brought to Croagh Patrick. Now that trail I was under two minds. I remember being stopped down at the bottom here on a very wild day by some of the mountaineering teams that were looking after our health. I said, lads, get out of my way. I said, I'm climbing the mountain. He said, it's very windy. I said, I know it's windy, but your job is to look after people who have got hurt, not to tell us that we could climb the mountain or not. So the building of the trail is already having cultural impacts on the mountain, but positive in terms it's way safer now, and people are climbing it who would never reach the summit. But it's also allowing more people to reach the summit, which is going to have other impacts. And the impact, of course, will be more erosion on the summit, where you have the key archaeological sites on it. So anything to do with access, even positive outcomes on one level can lead to negative outcomes on the other. But the trail, from what I've heard, I haven't been on it since it was finally finished. I've been on it from the west, but not from this route, is already having sort of big impacts in terms of lessening of injuries and so on, but more people reaching the top. The date of this mountain is very, very interesting. Traditional date of Croagh Patrick is 432. Date of his supposed day 441. And of course, you have in Ireland Palladius.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. No. I'm just listening. There's a talk on Croagh Patrick. There's on live, but I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I was going to say,
Thursday. Yeah.
Sorry, Orla. Sorry, Orla. Could you mute yourself, please? Sorry.
All right. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Orla.
Apologies.
Oh, you're okay. You're fine. So, the beginning of Christianity, the beginning of history in Ireland was Pope Celestine sent a bishop named Palladius to those believing in Christ. That's 430. So that's actually where history begins. So Patrick is here post this. So Patrick the Briton, as he should be called, as that's what he was called. Patrick was British. So he comes to Ireland as part of this huge cultural shift that happens in Ireland between the 4th and the 7th century. Ireland becomes Christian in these 2 or 3. It wasn't an immediate take. And it has been suggested that Croagh Patrick was at the center of a Christian pilgrimage, a pre-Christian pilgrimage tradition. And that's a very controversial subject, because what would a pre-Christian pilgrimage tradition look like? We simply don't have any idea. It is a suggestion, and one of the reasons we're excavating on Summit at the time was in order to clearly outline what was the sort of cultural context to the pilgrimage tradition. So we were able to confirm the presence of a church on top. And the cultural connection with Patrick is, of course, Patrick the Briton comes to Ireland in the 5th century, so early or mid, we're not quite sure, possibly even late 4th. And these are the great Roman forts on Western Britain. So the Romans, as they described the Irish, were the Scots, and you have major Roman fortifications opposite Ireland, in Cumbria, North Wales, particularly in Anglesey. And we have some Roman material in Ireland. Interestingly, we have some right up in Donegal, in Antrim, where you'd expect to be, close to the Roman frontier. So Patrick is one of these, sent to those of the Irish, Palladius in 431, Patrick slightly later. But we don't know where he's from. He's somewhere, he's from the land of the Britons, which that could be southern Scotland, Cumbria, Wales, Cornwall, or Brittany, because Brittany, of course, gets the name from the Britons. But clearly, Christianity is coming from the east into Ireland. and it's bringing in a whole wave with it of culture, of engineering, of art, artistry. Ireland has been isolated for 4 centuries by the Roman occupation of Britain. So we now rejoin this huge civilization, the Christian civilization. Though Rome falls, Ireland now rejoins the world in effect with its new religion. And of course, some of those new religions are arguably taking over and adopting pagan sanctuaries. So Croagh Patrick may well have been a pagan sanctuary. It's associated with tradition, with Crumdu, the dark, crooked one, but many high places, Momain is associated with Mount Brandon and Kerry, but it's a likely spot. Caesar Oswald, a wonderful scholar and minister of the church, he described in his account, which we only found after we identified the hill fort on top of Croagh Patrick, he said, opposite on the summit of Croagh Patrick, on the slope facing Clough, there's a great wall of Cyclopean stone built long before Patrick's time. So we found that Cyclopean wall, and we found the actual outline of the fortress, and that was an excavation led by Jerry Walsh of Mayo County Council at the time. Harry Hughes was the chairman of our project, and we carried out and we were able to establish finally that there was a Christian presence on the summit within a hill fort that's still not dated clearly, maybe prehistoric, and it's very possible that it is prehistoric. We don't have good evidence, but the mountain itself as a whole is like a ritual canvas, Neolithic, Bronze Age, early Christian, medieval sites wrapped all the way around it. The evidence for being prehistoric pilgrimage, however, is so far absent. So the absence of evidence, isn't evidence of absence, but it does complicate it. The assumption that there was a prehistoric pilgrimage here is an assumption. We don't have any evidence. But we do have evidence of an early church. And this is the one we excavated here on the right-hand side. It was sunken into the hilltop. It's one of several buildings on the top. And we backfilled in this church after we found it because pilgrims were coming up and taking it, the stones. And they were taking it because what better relic to have of your visit than the stone that Patrick's hand touched themselves. So this is an old tradition. In our house at home, we have soil that was given to me by Jimmy Carr from Glencullen when we left the valley many years ago, having surveyed it for the Donegal survey. And he said, here, put that in the foundations of the house. Columkill will look after you. You will never have a day's bad luck. And he said, it'll also keep the rats out. So you have a tradition of a faith, simple faith by simple people in relics of the church. And a relic from Croagh Patrick was disappearing as soon as we excavated it. So we backfilled this lovely little church sunken into the hill. But there are other buildings all around this building here, which are now being impacted by the increase in visitors that are reaching the summit because of our lovely new trail. So these are sort of tricky issues to negotiate. So very positive impact on people not breaking their neck or legs going up, but certainly it's going to impact on the archaeology on the summit. This is what the church may have looked like. So this is reconstructed, at least the roof is new, but it gives you a glimpse of what some of these early churches would have looked like. This is on the Skelligs. I was lucky enough to be there one day in the mist, and everyone was complaining about the mist and this, that, and the other. They couldn't see the end of your nose. We could hear the mass being said. And these are a group of Orthodox clergy with a little icon saying mass. So we can imagine a church, maybe a little bit bigger than this, with a series of other buildings, beehive cells perhaps, all sunken into the roof of Croagh Patrick. And they're still there in front of the present church. And so this is sort of a glimpse into the distant past, but was one that was survived right through history. And thankfully that pilgrimage tradition still goes on. This year, I climbed Croagh Patrick from the west. I hadn't done it on pilgrimage day for many years. And I came up from the very west side of the mountain. It's a side that was traditionally climbed from people from Louisburg, from Killadoon. They didn't go up the west, so there's 4 separate pilgrimage routes onto Croagh Patrick. And so from the west of Croagh Patrick, you have a series of very, very important early church sites. And this is one on the western slopes Wheelwray. They're marked by standing stones. Some of them are just now killings. Some of them are beautiful works of art. But as you get closer in, you can see the Croagh. So this is the view that people coming from the southwest of Murrisk, and they climbed Croagh from the southwest corner of the island, of the mountain. This pilgrimage tradition has recently been documented in a really wonderful film done by the little community at Louisburgh and Killeen, who recorded and reenacted the whole tradition of bringing their donkeys up and all the men and families associated with the stalls on Croagh. But this is the view, the journey they would have taken. This view actually is from a large tomb at 4 Mile. So if you haven't been to west of Croagh, there's some stunning archaeology here. This is a very large circular cairn. It may in fact be a passage tomb, which would be Neolithic. If not, it's a robbed out core tomb, reused as a big rectangular building right on top of the cairn. But this is the ridge. The ridge line, as you can see, going up to the summit peak, that was the route that was used up until very recently. And I'll tell you how recently it was used. It was used up until the new trail. So I climbed this year on the pilgrimage day, Éine Crumdú, so the Friday before the main pilgrimage. And normally you would have a couple of hundred people climbing it. And I'd set out, mass was at 10, I set out at 7:30. And normally you'd hear people or you'd meet people on the way. Not a sinner soul. It was raining heavy. Got up, couldn't see anyone. I couldn't figure out how come I hadn't met anyone. The reason I didn't meet anyone is with the new trail, people drove around to the front and now use the new trail to get up. Because of course it is much easier. But it ended almost overnight, a centuries old pilgrimage tradition of going up on the west side. So that's one of the impacts of the trail. It has already had a cultural impact. Now the trail and the pilgrimage, of course, from the west has been declining as the tradition of bringing the stalls up, because the people from the west were stall owners and it was a lovely, lovely tradition. And anyway, it doesn't happen. It has ended. So bracketing Croagh on either side, you have that Neolithic tomb on the west, and of course you have the Boé stone on the east, this very famous rock art site, which is littered. There's dozens of cup and ring circles. So if you like, Croagh is a sort of part of a ritual canvas. It's the centerpiece of this magical religious landscape that's been reinvented over millennia. But either side of it has got some magnificent sites. So these are just some of the panels of rock art on the site itself. The western route, this is the way it came. So it came up, but this is Louisburgh in the background. So the way up came up from this little village here at the very west side. And as you came up, this is one of the trails. So this now was a trail that was used by people from the west. So this is the opposite view from where we're looking down there on the lovely lowlands running west to the coast from Croagh. And this was the donkey trail coming up. The donkeys were that well trained, you could just let them off. They also, mules carried up the material to the shop, the tea and the whole regalia around pilgrimage. This is one of the lovely trails at the very start. It snakes around East Bluff. It's quite a tricky little route up and down, but it was quiet. First time, I think maybe last year might be, certainly this year, I didn't see a single soul on it. And of course, it's a route up. So the southwest is really extraordinary route. It's looking down on a very sliver of very good land that comes into the base of the mountain. This is a fantastic Achill, the squaring of the land from the 19th century. So the southwest side of the mountain has a series of very, very important early Christian and earlier monuments tucked in under this little corner. It's a corner that most people miss, but it's really lovely side of the mountain. And what's extraordinary, though, is when you get up on the mountain, the early accounts of Croagh don't mention the scree. So what's happened to it? This is what's happened to it. The bog has eroded off it. This is on the west shoulder, but as you can see, it's below the cone. So this is at almost, this is about 1,800 feet. Look at the depth of peat that we've lost on Croagh. The reason there's no early accounts of the scree is it wasn't visible. It was covered in peat. So this is the level of peat loss that we're having right across the uplands. But if you reduce your grazing, you reduce the further loss of this. And that's what's happening here. So you have in pockets here, not peatland regeneration, but at least vegetation regeneration. But this is all carbon, stored carbon. And so there's been massive erosion on these uplands. This erosion predates the 1950s. It's going back, you know, and it's probably one of the impacts we have since the switch from cattle into sheep 200 years ago in these uplands. When you come along, this was in a Croagh, good Croagh Friday, the Mass on the Friday before the last Sunday in July. And this was one of the main traditional shrines on the island. So this is Gary Moore, it's called the big field relic Wirra. So when you climb Croagh Patrick, you're not finished your pilgrimage until you come down and do the circuit of pilgrimage around these cairns and then back up to the summit before heading back down and out to Kilgeever, where you continue your pilgrimage. But there's a lovely site here, and these are pilgrimage cairns that have been developed over the centuries here on the slope. But there's a series of other cairns, again, not very elaborate and certainly not prehistoric, but there's a line of cairns marking a route on the western face up. So there's still a lot of basic recording we have to do on some of these pilgrimage mountains. So before we allow any bloody new tracks or trails, we should be recording these and mapping these uplands in great detail with people who know what they're looking at. Think about field archaeology. It's a subject that you learn every day you're run out. And it's where you need experienced people looking at the mountains, not the latest lad that's joined the team. But it's really lovely and lots of unmapped sites up here. And of course, at the base of it, you have this fantastic site, Killadangan Stone Road. The row is in the middle here. You have a line of standing stones, other standing stones. This is a salt marsh now. So this is a really interesting part of the Croagh Patrick landscape. It's a drowned landscape, drowned by rising sea levels. This site dates to roughly 1100 BC, but it's one of several other features. So when you look at Clew Bay, so between the Nephins and Clew Bay, you have this incredible drowned drumlin landscape. The drumlins of Clew Bay dating back roughly 22,000 years, give or take. We won't fight over them. And in the immediate time, the sea has risen very dramatically, drowning these landscapes. One of the sites that I noticed when I was surveying these islands many years ago, on the way out to Collinmore Island, I noted and said I must come back to them, a series of banks cutting off half a mile out on this narrow isthmus here. And where the arrows are there, they're marking two ramparts. And I wasn't quite sure were they natural or what the hell were they. So I went back out this year to have a look. And as I had a look, there's the two ramparts here. The tractor here in the foreground is on one. That's about 180 meters across to give you scale. 20 meters behind it, there's another large bank running right out. That's about 250 meters. And what it appears to be is a defensive boundaries marking and defining the sort of eastern approaches to Collinmore Island. But when these were built, almost certainly this island was part of the mainland. So we went down. Luckily, there was some Gibbonses down on the shore, Joe Gibbons, cutting weed down off it. So we started cutting some weed to have a look. Were these natural banks? What was their form and texture? And so as we cut back, we could see that these are stone-faced ramparts. We don't know when the stone facing took place, because this is a very substantial structure. This is the outer rampart here. And I had a few archaeologists from Mayo County Council with me and a few scholars.
Michael, you've just about 5 minutes left now. Okay. And don't forget Achill.
We're getting on to Achill. Sorry, I'm tall. So this is the cutting across here. This is the seaweed being pulled off on these massive ashlar blocks.
Thank you, Michael.
So here we have that was that was Richard Gillespie with us there. And this further up the lake. So the context for this massive site is 2 or 3 large forts which you have in the lakes of Mayo. This is one on Loch Furnace. This is Train Beg in the mountains of the Nephins here. And this is looking up into a fantastic site in the hill that Michael Chambers found a few years ago, and Marion O'Dowd excavated. A natural boulder chamber with Neolithic and Bronze Age burials tucked in under the sunny ridge up there. But this is a very interesting fort, probably Bronze Age in date, but paralleling the one in the water. And further down in the Joyce Country Mountains, this is one near Finney. There's another fort.
We're
getting there. And then on to Achill.
Could you mute yourself in the meantime, Richard, please? Thanks.
So we're getting on to Achill here. So this is Achill as we've seen it. And just off the north coast of it, there's a fantastic site, Ilon Minon. So this is a cliff-bound fortress we found, or possibly early church site, out on the island. So this is the very northwest of Eris. Looks like somewhere out of deepest Thailand. This is on the stacks of Broadhaven. But the island on the left has a fort on it. And on the Bangor Trail, you have a network of trails. The main one, which is being developed, but there's another network which I've located. And then you have, as you go further down into Croagh, some very interesting new sites. This is a fantastic complex of boolies. This is a booley complex that are recognizable at the bottom of the mountain here. You can see there's a cluster of 6 booley houses. These are seasonal settlements. This is one of them. So really well defined. And I also found one down near a very complicated one. So this is again in the Nephins. So this area is
accept it. It's been recorded, not allowed.
Sorry, Richard, would you please mute yourself? Thanks.
Sorry, I thought it was muted.
No, you're not. I'm sorry. No, you're not. Could we just have one speaker, please? Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry about that. No bother. So now we're back into Achill. So this is a wonderful, Achill is such a lovely place. And you're looking over at Kildavnet Castle. And so you have 2 major sites down in this part. You have Kildavnet Castle, and of course you have the medieval church site at Kill. So I'm saying, well, wow, if there's a medieval castle, a medieval church, and an early church site, there's very likely should be an early secular site matching it. And the southern tip of Achill, Cloughmore, has a number of promontory forts, one where the fish factory plant, the other is Doonglass in the channel between the 2 islands. But I said, well, it's big enough island, there should be a cashel there somewhere. I'll have a look at the cashel. This has been not noted before, and the cashel is in the middle, as you can see. It's on a crookon, so it's a very cashel-like settlement. So around it is a deserted settlement. All these little mounds are the remains of quite a substantial settlement. And then as the cashel was demolished to build the 19th century settlement, they reused the inner face of the cashel wall to build a pound. So this is actually a reused cashel, utilizing the stone, and the arc of the cashel is running around the inner face of the actual cashel itself. So this is really quite an interesting site, but it's a cashel, so very happy to find this. And people would have been passed it by, and this is why it's very important to do your field work in the uplands in the spring, not midsummer. You won't see the cashel field, and there's a series of hut sites related to this site in and around this site. So it's really, really lovely. And look at the location of it, commanding the pass, overlooking the church. Very, very spectacular site. And the hill above it, there are some prehistoric sites. So this is a lovely figure of 8 enclosure. Now it's enclosing a little pond here. Almost certainly the pond is a result of the enclosure rather than the enclosure being around the pond, if you know what I mean. It's part of a prehistoric, again, suggested prehistoric site, high up on the ridge above Kildavnet, so the Kildavnet Cloughmore border, but it's a really very interesting figure of 8 enclosure. Again, a lot of our upland sites are floating in time and space. And I know Richard is listening. On Clare Island, there's one cup mark stone. So cup mark stone are Neolithic and Bronze Age are This might be one. It's a little bit dodgy, but there are 5 rock art sites in the uplands of Mayo, at Ballycroy, above Turmacady, Bohay, of course, itself, and there's a couple more gone out of my head now. But this is a possible one from Achill, bang in the middle. The little ice cream scoop has taken out of it. And these are typically called Galician arts, and this might be one. So, Sinead, if you've got any questions, you can.
Cheers, Michael. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. A visual feast as well as an audio feast. Delighted to see so many places that I'm totally familiar with. But I'll throw it over to the attendees now. Anyone got a question for Michael? Anyone want to start off? Paula, you're just thanking Michael. Don't be shy, Richard, did you want to comment? Anyone else?
John.
Hello, Mary.
John,
Yes.
Could I just follow up on what Michael is talking about, the path work, in Croagh. I saw it myself. I mean, throngs of people using the path now, getting to the top. What does he suggest should be done at the top to try to protect the surface?
I'm kind of amazed that wasn't included in any pre-planning for it. We have a similar trail going through the middle of the national park in the Bangor, and they're actually knocking original 19th century buildings and reusing them as hikers' huts, but they're part of the historic fabric of the park. So one bit of the hill walkers are getting new huts, while the historians are losing historic fabric needlessly. I'd love to have lots of new huts in there, but not on the original site. The minister announced this bloody 19th century cabin at Letterkenny. It's no more 19th century than I am. It's a modern 1900 major. So we're missing a couple of bits of joint unplinting. Like, there doesn't seem to be an environmental impact assessment of the new path and its impact on the summit of the mountain. Which, if you're adding extra thousands, and it'll be thousands, not a couple of hundred onto the summit, that's having, and probably is having it. And I remember we did a project many years ago looking at the Pilgrim's Trail for this, and that's 30 years ago, Mary, when we worked on that project.
Yeah.
So it should have been stitched into the program for the trail. And like, the trail is a huge bit of it. Lots of people are loving it, and people who are quite elderly, and I'm 65 myself, entering that phase soon, are getting onto the summit of Croagh. But you can't presume it's not. So I think a circular route going down the west side where the trail already is, and using the route from the northwest side of the mountain to make it a circular route and linking it back to the summit was certainly, it will ease the pressure of people coming back down, back out. So I think, so it will take people off the top. They're heading to another destination rather than hanging around half the day on top. But anyway, it's one of these difficult questions. There isn't any easy answer, but there certainly should not be impacting on the historic fabric of either the Bangor Trail or the summit of Croagh. And I don't know why they're not taking best practice into, look at this outdoor recreation infrastructure project. Where was the EIS for that? And
could there be some monitoring, Michael, of the impact on the summit?
Well, yeah, that would be a lovely project, and that would be quite simple to do. You get a drone survey; they're not expensive. You document as it is now. And next year, because there will be impacts fairly immediately, given the numbers are climbing Croagh. It's not like there'll be small scale numbers, and maybe the numbers maybe the impacts will be less than feared, but certainly there are buildings all around the top of Croagh to the east of the church, and the enclosure is still there if degraded. So that probably should have been thought of during the planning stage for the new trail, because the new trail, the men who worked on it have done an incredible job. Like, hats off to them. Amazing value for money. Didn't cost, You know, it costs minimal amount, and they're all hand done. So I mean, it's a spectacular achievement for the men who did it. But there should have been someone looking out for the archaeology on the summit. So that's a bit the thing. I worked on that excavation. Richard was the main archaeologist, together with Jerry Walsh and myself, and Frank. A few others were involved.
This was it, I think, Michael, wasn't it? That was
Yes.
the Leo Moran.
And Leo then subsequently did a survey around the area as well. But that was all done by a small little group, chaired by Harry Hughes, Croagh Research Committee. So
Yeah.
it was a lot of work for a tiny budget. So
Yeah.
it should be possible to for the state to at least throw a few bob into these things. But removing
I think it's a very good suggestion of yours, Michael, because I know the people from Lacanvi were certainly pushing for that in the early stages. You know, when the path restoration work commenced, that people were saying, why don't you develop a path down to the west as well? Because that works very well on the likes of Diamond Hill. I know they're different environments, they're different situations, but they're both hills, let's put it that way. And I mean, but obviously Croagh has a much more significant summit than Diamond Hill, and therefore it makes more sense to get people off the summit as quickly as possible, because you're so right. I mean, even since you were up on in Crumdove, some of the signposting on top of the summit has been defaced since, and what's called St. Patrick's Bed, you know, is continuously getting T-shirts and memorabilia left behind on top of it, you know, and despite the best will in the world of some of the volunteers, you know, it doesn't take long for it to become an eyesore. I think, you see, the problem is at the moment that there's only one car park in Morrisk. So if you bring them down into Lacanvi, it's a long walk back to Morrisk. But
Yeah,
it could easily be, you know, there could easily be a trail just getting people back into Morrisk to their cars again. But I agree with you. I think it's a very good point.
yeah, it'd be lovely to have it as a loop walk, you know,
Yeah.
running up and down, and it would be, and of course, it would mean that the main trail as it is now will last that much longer.
Indeed. Yeah,
No.
yeah, because they've already been inspecting it, and only in the last week or so, last weekend, the lads that did the reconstruction or the repair work, they say that it needs ongoing maintenance, you know, and there's an appeal out for volunteers again now for maintenance of the path.
Yeah. Anyway, well, we have this huge resource in our uplands, you know, but we should be looking after it when we're making it more accessible. Probably a little bit better than we've been doing, or at least thinking a bit more outside the box, because
Yeah, indeed. Would Frank or anyone like to comment?
No, I just enthralled by. Can you hear me?
yes,
Yeah. As always, Michael, it's just astounding what we have there. You know, I was over in Mayo there for there was a festival out on Achill, and I did a bit of rock climbing on one of the sea stacks, and I spent the day out on Achill, and yeah, I'm sure that landscape has Achill got any archaeological relics
yeah, no,
that you know of?
it has a couple of huge forts. Doon Kilbeg is a large promontory fort on the west side. So the Kilboard, large monastic enclosure, set within an even bigger Bronze Age fortress with multiple sub-defended headlands on the west side. And then on the northwest corner of Achill, another large promontory fort. The promontory bit now has been cut off with stone surges. It's now an island. And there's eroding archaeology all along the channel, but it's really, really fabulous.
It's only across the channel from Kildownet.
That's right. It's an exceptional island. It's a beautiful place.
Oh, it's beautiful to walk. There's a lovely, beautiful ridge along the top of it.
Stunning.
It's stunning.
John, I have another question, please. Michael, those Booley huts, are they recorded? Are they mapped?
No, they're not. So there will be, because I have them. I know where they are, and that lovely new map of Nephin, you know, that's been done.
By east-west mapping.
So that's
Barry Dalby,
Barry's fabulous. Like, he's a real treasure, and he has mapped quite a lot of sites. But the on that map, but the individual monuments then haven't been mapped. So there is a lovely project there. There's dozens of booty huts within the Bangor at the new national park area, for example, and then there's other down at Claggan, and then there's quite a few prehistoric sites that are likely to be there as well. And so yeah, the Uplands is still a lot to have. Particularly there's a lot of new information, a lot of new sites to be mapped in detail.
Yeah.
I'm one of these guys. I'm exposed here, there, and everywhere the whole time, so I'm stumbling on stuff.
I have to ask you again though before you go. I mean, will Loch Dahibon ever be explored?
Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah,
We
you're still happy to go with that.
No, like if can you imagine excavating Queen Maeve's tomb and only to find out that it's a Neolithic passage tomb, as opposed to Queen Maeve being buried.
I know.
So sites, we shouldn't be going near sites unless there's absolute necessity to do it because of a road or a bridge or something, and then rarely, but the big mountaintop ones, I think we should be leaving them alone because they've survived this long. We don't have to dig them. We can dig the ones that need digging, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's good to hear.
But I think just to get back to the Booley huts again, Michael.
Sorry, yeah.
I think that story is terribly important. How the mountains were used, that you had cattle there, and people bringing the cattle up in the summer. Like the Burren now make a big thing about what they call the winterage.
Yeah.
The cattle are brought up to the rocky sort of outcrops, and they have a festival around it, which they've kind of revived.
Well, there's a lovely book just published by a brilliant scholar. He's a farmer himself. He's now a lecturer in UCG, not UC. He did his MA in UCG. He's back in Cork.
Yeah.
His name is just vanished out of my head now. But
is it Eugene Costello? Is it
Dr. Eugene Costello? Yes, and he's a farmer's son himself, dairy farmer, and he's written this tremendous book on bullying. Like it's really, really fabulous. Anyone in the Uplands should have it. And he's a great scholar, and he's excavated some of these recently down in the Reeks in County Kerry. So he'd be one lovely guy to get to do a talk on this series. But and we do know now that some of these sites are going back to the Middle Ages. So there, this interchange between the lowlands and the uplands has been going on for millennia. But it was particularly, and it lasted longest in Connemara, died out in the Dingle Peninsula early enough, which is interesting, and survived in Galway Mayo probably the longest of anywhere in the country. And these are herds of cattle from certain townlands to certain areas of mountain. I asked a man in Clifton or in Streamstown, they used to bring their cattle across the bay to Booling in the big bogland north of Streamstown Bay, between Streamstown Bay and Cleggan Bay, a big flat mountain, as he called it. And there's a large Booley site in there. And he said that the Booling died out in that area when the land was squared with land reform.
Yeah.
Individual townlands had grazing in an individual townland, but not in the adjoining townland. Whereas before the squaring of the land, you brought your cattle into the uplands and you had a bigger area that you could graze on. And it wasn't as defined. So that began, and they used to swim the cattle across Streamstown Bay and into a place called Boolia Ord, the High Booley. It's halfway out straight, and then up onto the flat mountain above that.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a really, really, and of course, Eugene Costello is at the start of his studies, if you like. He started excavating them. So we will have a huge amount more, Mary, on this topic very soon when he gets to, and he's a prolific publisher as well.
It sounds like something that we should be interested, we should be, looking at,
Yeah, and then, like, that's the lovely thing about these mountains. Like, our mountains are full of these sites.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And because they're not diagnostic, they're not ritual and such, they've tended not to be mapped up to now because they're humble works for humble people. So they haven't got the profile of the other monuments, but they're just as equally important.
But Michael, are you getting them on a record, or are we going to rely on Barry Dalby's map of Nephin?
Oh, no. I as I come across monuments, I've a list of about 200 to send in, but I'm sending in monuments the whole time into the record. But
Yes.
because they're not diagnostic, the difficulty is what date are they? So sometimes you can have depending on which archaeology you're dealing with, which one goes on a map and which doesn't. And, you know, how do you date something that you don't have a date for? So some counties are more quick off the mark to include sites, and others are less so. But there's a load of new sites in Mayo that I have to send in, literally dozens in the mountains. And Barry's work, of course, has other sites marked all over the place that are, you know, he has noted them, but they're not recorded in the detail that would be required or will be. But that can happen. Like the nice thing about them in Ballycroagh in the park, they're largely unthreatened unless someone decides they're a famine cottage and does it up. Would not be happening.
Yeah.
Not be doing up the historic fabric to cater for walkers. If we want a hut, let's put in a wooden hut that we can take out, but not wrecking century buildings to build walkers' huts. That should not happen. These are protected landscapes, including the historic fabric within them.
Great stuff. Well, look, I'd love to stay chatting all night, but I'm afraid we have to wrap it up at some stage, unless somebody's got another burning question for Michael. But I'd like to thank Ria Lavelle most sincerely for hosting the event tonight. Thanks, Ria.
And no problem. Sorry, people were saying during the presentation there that I should mute everybody, but I was afraid if I do that, Michael would be muted as well. So that's why I didn't try that option. Apologies.
Good for you. Yeah,
Thanks, thanks very much. And thanks the Upland Forum for the invite to just explore some of this new material. So thank you.
Thanks.
Lovely to have you, Michael. And if there's anyone with us tonight, just to let you know that there are 3 more talks on the next 3 Tuesday nights. So we hope to see you all along again. Thanks very much again, Michael. Thank you.
Good.
See you, Michael.
Yeah.